All right. Hey, I'm Richard Retta, as you all probably know by now, and this is my little slideshow about the person I chose, Augusto Boal. And in advance, I apologize for my awful pronunciations, but let's get right into it. Augusto Boal is a Brazilian theater director who was born on March 16th, 1931, and he died at the old age of 78 back in 2009. He was an influential theater director, and he was a strong political player. Let's start from the beginning. As a child, Boal grew up in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and he studied to become a chemical engineer. He got his degree for this at the age of 21. However, as a child, he was always interested in theater, and after he obtained his degree, he moved to New York City in order to study theater at Columbia University. After his time in New York, he eventually went back to Brazil in order to work with the Arena Theater in Sao Paulo. Here, he directed plays and experimented with different forms of theater. His time in Sao Paulo was an incredibly important part of his life because it was here that he began to develop his own theatrical form called the Theater of the Oppressed. This form was a combination of different theatrical approaches like Stanislavski's system combined with political ideals that he got from people such as Paulo Freire. To put it in simpler terms for now, Augusto Boal used what he had learned in his time studying theater in America, and he applied what he learned to promote his leftist political agenda in Brazil. Examples of him using this approach are seen in earlier productions that he did, such as Of Mice and Men. He directed a play for Of Mice and Men, and he transformed it slightly to more closely resemble Brazilian political issues. The Theater of the Oppressed form also gives more interactivity to the spectators. In the 60s, Boal was trying a new idea where he had the people watching a performance and they could stop it at any time and suggest different actions the actors could do in order to help that actor get out of a situation that they were being oppressed in. In one point, one of the spectators went up on stage and visibly showed what she wanted to happen in the play. This was an eye-opener for Boal, and he developed the term spect actor from it. Basically, the idea was that if spectators take action in the play, actually standing up and performing what they wanted and become spect actors, they would be more likely to stand up to oppression in their real lives after standing up to it on stage. The topic of oppression was a very important one during the 60s and 70s because since 1964, Brazil had been harshly ruled by a military regime, and the oppression was kind of common then in that country. I just want to say right now, though, that this is just one of many different techniques in Boal's Theater of the Oppressed. I can't cover all of them in just a couple minutes, so if you want to find out more for yourself, I highly recommend looking into it. To put it simply, though, basically, Boal's Theater of the Oppressed was a theatrical form that in many different ways got people to promote and believe in social and political change. Anyway, unfortunately, because Boal was becoming a popular political figure in Brazil, and he spent most of his time directing plays at the Arena in Sao Paulo, it was not hard for the military to find him. Since Boal was talking a lot about leftist ideas and the military was not a fan of that, they decided to take action. In 1971, he was kidnapped, arrested, tortured, and exiled to Argentina, where he stayed for 5 years. He used these 5 years in Argentina to start writing books, the most important of which would be his 1973 book titled Theater of the Oppressed. The book was a combination of his ideas about the theater world and a more finalized development of his theatrical method, which was based heavily off of someone I mentioned earlier, Paulo Freire's book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed. I don't know how to say that. In his book, he also went into more detail about what the difference is between a spectator and a spect actor and explained the benefits to being a spect actor. Boal also wrote a second book called Torquemada, which was about the Brazilian use of torture in prisons. After his time in Argentina, he decided to go to Peru and Ecuador in order to try and preach his theatrical technique to other oppressed communities. He believed that, quote, only the oppressed could free the oppressed, end quote. He then moved to Paris for several years and became a teacher at Sorbonne University. He also created several centers for the Theater of the Oppressed in Paris. Finally, he had an international festival for the Theater of the Oppressed in 1981. In general, after Argentina, he started to make his method more widely known in order to help as many people as possible. A lot of time passed by, and eventually the Brazilian military dictatorship ended. Boal decided to go back to his home country in 1986. There, he no longer faced oppression from the government, and actively worked on spreading his theater of the oppressed method. He established another center for it in the city of his birth, Rio de Janeiro, and in 1992, he ran for city councilor and got elected. As a councilman, he actively asked the people what they wanted, which was very unusual for a politician to actually care about the people they represent. It was interesting. He attempted to pass 40 laws during his time as councilman, and 13 of them actually got passed. In 1996, his term ended, and he then went to go protest in favor of giving Brazilian prisoners better, healthier lifestyles. If you remember, I talked a little bit ago about how he wrote a book on the unfair torture of prisoners back in the 70s. Now, 20 years later, he's actually working on trying to fix those things. Overall, though, in his later years, Boal had a family, spread the word about his theater of the oppressed method, and died from leukemia at the age of 78. Many people argue that he is now the most well-known Brazilian theater practitioner today. This work can apply to our class quite easily. I think most of us have the same ideals that we should be fighting back against depression. A lot of the acting warm-up games we play in class actually resemble techniques Boal created. He did a lot for his community and changed the world with his method. It's up to us to use his knowledge and become the actors that we want to be, to make change that we want to see in the world. Anyway, finally, to summarize, Augusto Boal was an important Brazilian theater practitioner who created the theater of the oppressed method and used his theatrical form to change the world for the better. Yeah, that's what I got. Thanks for watching.